Everybody is doing well, as y'all can tell. I am at the Hayti Heritage Center at this particular time. On this particular evening, it is definitely a lovely, warm day. It's been warm as well, and it's been warm all over the country and all in that space. Could be worse, though. I was actually talking to my mom earlier, and if you have looked at the news, you might have seen that there is a small town or small little community called Dorchester, which is up near Rocky Mount, and they were hit with a tornado. So that wasn't that far from mom's house, but she actually only managed to get a few leaves in her swimming pool. And I don't think that we had any family members that were impacted, even though several people definitely faced some devastation and all in that kind of line. So a lot of people are dealing with the heat and are dealing with it, whether you're in California, whether you're in North Carolina, where I am, or whether you're in New York or a number of other places. I understand there's a heat wave in Asia and a heat wave in Europe as well. Ironically, I have not heard of a heat wave in Africa. Not saying that there isn't one, but they haven't reported it as of yet, even though the equator does go through some of the African nations and all in that space. So maybe they're having a heat wave and it just hasn't got into the news coverage as of yet. And of course, Australia is down under, so maybe they're not having any bad weather at all. Next time I see Shaquille or some of my other friends from Australia and New Zealand, I'll have to find out how the weather is holding where they are and all in that space. But it is always good having conversations with people that are doing amazing things and even trying to find ways that we can develop our own psychic abilities and definitely do things in that space. And if, for those of you who watched the earlier afternoon edition, you know that we had conversations around that because we were talking about how a lot of people have psychic abilities and all in that space, but they don't always develop the psychic abilities as much as they should. I know I try to pay attention to my dreams, but oftentimes by the time I wake up, the dreams have gone. The rat race of life has gotten into full force, and then I have forgotten what the dream was, and it might have been an important message in the dream because I do believe that the ancestors and others speak to us regularly in our dreams, and we need to pay attention to the messages that they give us and the messages that Mother Earth and Mother Nature give us as well, because they can oftentimes send strong signals as to what is going on in our life also. And as I said on one of the other shows, both earlier this afternoon as well as in past shows and everything, I am definitely a big believer that sometimes we don't know do enough in exploring our inner child and all in that space. Sometimes we figure that we got to do the grown up thing and be very grown up and all of that responsibility that comes with being grown up. But even at 61, and I hit that on July 1st, I still think that that childlike wonder and even childlike curiosity can do as well in life. And sometimes we need to turn back to those forces and all in that space. A little play is good in life, not just in a romance and relationships, but just in life in general. So I'm going to bring in somebody that has a similar kind of philosophy from what I have read and understand and all along those lines. And we're going to find out some of the things that are going on with Miss Hathaway, Elaine Hathaway, and all in that space. For some reason, whenever I hear the name Hathaway, I think of, I believe it was a great actress that had that name as well. So I'm going to pull up Elaine and see how things are going on in her life and how things are going on in terms of keeping even cool. Because I know that there's been some hot weather in the California area as well as just the West Coast in general. And we've been having temperatures today was actually mild because there was some threat of rain, and there might even be a threat of rain later on this evening that has dropped the temperatures more into the 80s and the 70s. But then that also adds to this thing called humidity, and the temperatures can be quite hot. I think that there have been several days that we've been pushing near 100, which is not a pleasant feel, particularly if you add the humidity to it as well. So sometimes I'm just staying at home, staying in with my air conditioning in the case of where I'm at work, or the fans blowing when I am in my apartment and all along those lines. But how are you doing and how are you coping with this weather?
I'm doing so well, Mark. Actually, you know what's funny? It practically didn't shine. The sun didn't shine for about 6 months in California. Sincerely, like people were getting seasonal affective disorder because we're used to the sun shining all the time, and it was very, very cool all the way up through the 4th of July, and now it's trying to compensate. So I'm feeling very grateful that I have some air conditioning to sit in. But about 2 weeks ago, I was wondering if we were ever going to be warm. And the entire time I knew that the second it was hot, I was going to wonder if it ever going to cool down. So like most people, I'm never completely happy with the weather, but it's beautiful where I am.
Sounds like it's very beautiful. I do have to ask that $6 million question, which is one that people ask about certain cities, and definitely California is one of those. Are you a native of California? Because a lot of times people will say that hardly anybody from California is actually from California because there's all of those transplants that are going there and moving there for the Hollywood dream and some of the other dreams, including the tech dream and all in that space. So I know that you live in California now, but are you a native of California, or are you one of those people that moved there in order to pursue some of your own dreams and your own ambitions?
Oddly enough, I'm neither, but I am not a native of California. And you have to remember, California, Los Angeles County is the most populous county in the United States. We have more people in that than the rest of the country has, just period. And I'm just outside of Los Angeles County. I'm from the East Coast. You're going to pick up a slight Southern twang in my voice because I was raised by two people from Appalachia. And then I also was briefly married a long time ago to somebody from Oklahoma. And so I've got a little bit of his stuff going on there. And I was in Colorado and Missouri and Pennsylvania and New Jersey. And I'm not from many places for very long. And I came out here for my ex-husband's job about 7 years ago and love it. I think it's absolutely beautiful. And I understand why spirituality is something that people so easily reach for here. When you're surrounded by beauty all the time, you start to wonder what's behind it. So it's also part of the reason I stay here is that there are so many people who are trying to get in touch with mindfulness and their own journey and their life's purpose.
No, that makes a lot of sense. As you were saying that, I was thinking about I have a cousin that is from this area. Well, actually, she lives in the Holliston when she's not traveling and everything, but she is very much into the native culture. Most of my brother, myself, and my mom and dad pretty much identify primarily with the African American culture. We don't dismiss other parts of our cultural lineage as well, including the Native American side and, of course, some of the European side as well. But I do have cousins that do a little bit of the opposite. They identify more with their native roots, or what some people might call First Nation roots, and all in that space. And they are very much into the spiritual aspect of that and definitely are involved in a lot of that, whether it's the fancy dancing or other things that they do in that lane as they go on the powwow circuits. And the cousin that I'm thinking about, Verna, was married to a gentleman from the Apache tribe and all along those lines. So I was wondering, did any of your mindfulness and spirituality journey start developing further when you got married and were involved with the gentleman from Oklahoma? Because I do know that there are a lot of native
No,
roots and a lot of that.
he's not somebody who was a very spiritual person. Part of the reason that, and by the way, he's been married to somebody else for a very long time. They're happy. That's his soulmate. Hallelujah. It's great news. But he actually is an evangelical Christian at this point.
Oh,
And so like, I'm certain that he like burns me an effigy just for the fun of it sometimes, but he didn't have anything to do with my spirituality journey. I have always been somebody, it's a long story, but I was raised in a way that kept me isolated from almost all other people. My parents split when I was very small, and I was like in the care of my alcoholic grandmother in a giant empty 8-bedroom house. So it was me and books and TV, and we lived right next to the only African American church in the area. So I'd look out windows and I'd see all these stained glass windows. And the best things in my life were the very liberal Episcopal church that I attended as a child and sang in the choir and everything. Even though I'm a witch, I actually used to sing in a choir. And I also, as a child, my grandmother would scrimp and save to send me to Quaker farm camp so she could be rid of me for a little while in the summer, and I don't blame her. It was absolutely wonderful. Quaker farm camp was one of the things that really, really shaped me. And when you ask about where my spiritual journey really began, it was there, because Quakers do not speak about their faith. They try and live it. When they have meetings, they do not speak much. So they would take all of these campers out into the woods in Pennsylvania. And it turns out there was only ever one Quaker farm camp. So like people heard me talking about it on another podcast, and people from the Quaker community booked with me to update me on what had happened to that camp. And it just closed last year. So it was around forever. And that was actually where we would go out into the woods and everyone would sit with their own thoughts, which is what they do in a Quaker meeting. You don't, unless you feel moved to speak, you do not speak. And so basically, and then we'd sing some hymns, but there is no doctrine that they follow. There is no pattern that they follow. There's no pomp nor circumstance. It is you trying to connect with your divine source. And I started going there when I was 7 years old and went 7 through 12, and which is the age at which, you would be aged out of that camp. And if I had a spirituality journey that began someplace, it was being introduced to a very liberal Episcopal church, but it was really the Quakers who made me start, understanding that there was the divine presence in all forms of nature, and particularly in animals. And so that was something that I carried and, drifted away for it for a while. When I was in my 30s, I met a shaman named Mario, which is like my favorite, detail about this guy. His name was Mario. So, it was just this wonderfully down to earth person who told me I was a shaman and I needed to go and train as a shaman, but I had to leave my husband first. And I was like, well, I'm not going to leave my husband. And he's like, yes, yeah, you are. And I'm like, no, I'm really not. Well, spoiler, he was right. And I never did train as a shaman per se, but I am an energy healer and I use the tarot to help people look into their past and their present and their future. But the past is usually the things that contains the wounds that we need to heal. When we're talking about inner child healing, I can use cards to help people figure out why they do the things they do, why they choose the partners they choose, and what they're trying to heal. And we work on how to heal it together. So my spirituality journey is not like, it doesn't conform to any particular path, but I did have somebody on my own podcast who went and prayed with Lakota and has been, and does that regularly. She takes prayers to their tree for me every year and asks me what I want her to pray for. And so I do know people who have walked that. It's called the Red Path. So I do know people who have done that. And it can be one of the doors that opens for people. And I do live in a part of the country where indigenous people's beliefs, the Chumash were very prevalent in California. And there are still a lot of indigenous people who practice within California. So it's, I live cheek by jowl with it, even if I'm not a part of it.
No, that makes a lot of sense. As you were speaking, a couple of things were crossing my mind. One was the fact that you mentioned your love or a love as a child of stained glass, and that is one of the things that people catch when they come here to the Hayti Heritage Center, because it is a converted Saint Episcopal AME church and all in that space. So it's an AME church, and a number of the original stained glasses are here, including one of Mr. Duke, who requested that the stained glass be placed there. And some people say he has a more prominent view than even the angels and Jesus himself and everything, and that sometimes throws people off. But I personally think that the folks that were here at that time got a little bit of revenge or a little bit of payback, because they also put a Orishna symbol or a voodoo symbol on the steeple. So there's some very interesting back and forth dynamics that go on in this building, which has some very beautiful stained glass and some great acoustics. So if you ever get a chance or you ever visit Durham, I would definitely urge you to come to this particular venue, as well as some of the other things that exist, because it is known for its sound, but also known for the beauty of the stained glass and a couple of other features that exist within it. So I was just wondering, what are some of your favorite stained glass images that you recall from growing up? Because they're oftentimes very intricate paintings of the Bible story and things along those lines. So I didn't know if there were any favorites that you remember from that church when you were growing up.
Now, I grew up next to a church, and then I attended a church. And in the church I attended, I loved the stained glass of St. Stephen, because it was St. Stephen's Episcopal Church. But this is an interesting little sidebar. Because I was very isolated, and I was put into a group of 10 kids in an academically talented program, and I was the one they picked on. So I was the one who was bullied, and so I spent a lot of time alone, which means that I didn't have a lot of social programming present in my life. I was always trying to withdraw from people. As a result, because I lived next to an African-American church, it was it never occurred to me that Jesus wasn't actually Black. It really, because that when you're asking what my favorite image was, every time I looked out of the windows on one side of this very large and empty house, there was a giant image of Jesus with two apostles, and there was a dove, and I believe it was Mary leaning in front of him or kneeling in front of him. And of course, he was depicted for the African American church as being African American, which made perfect sense to me with the Bible and in the Middle East. And I was like, oh, that makes perfect sense. And understood much later as a full grown person that they didn't know that that many people didn't go, oh wait, we have been depicting Jesus with very light skin for our own comfort, but Jesus of course did not have very light skin, and that is even in that much translated and thrown around book.
No, it's interesting you say that, because I was having a conversation not that long ago with a friend of mine, and we were actually talking about that, because there are several of the great artists that, as I understand it, intentionally changed the painting of Jesus for exactly that reason, because some of the early paintings did depict him as being of Mediterranean descent and other things. So I want to say it might have even been Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci and a number of others that were commissioned to basically paint them in a more Eurocentric and more palatable kind of way. And I personally think that that still goes on in this day, unfortunately.
Oh, it does. It absolutely does. It's not simply whitewashing. It's you see it in children's literature, and part of the reason we try and make sure that we have diverse dolls available to people is there's something called character identification in anything that starts to shape you. So people do actually like to see images of what they feel included by. And so that is part of the reason that, like, if, there's the blonde haired, blue eyed Jesus of, Catholicism that was throughout Europe and then into the United States, was influenced by the supposition that people would only truly feel like they were part of a flock if they recognized the complexion of the figure being depicted as being like their own. And it doesn't make a lot of sense when you break it down in step, but we react from these very, it's not part of the conscious mind for a lot of people. And so I'm assuming that's why they did it. But like I said, as a kid, and I lived in that house from 3 to 15, my idea of Jesus was actually of a person of color. Right outside my window for many, many years. And that was how I approached that. And so maybe that's why I always felt like there was something watching over me, because I lived next to a towering church. They're the best neighbors, by the way. Best neighbors in the world. Hardly made any noise except for Sundays.
Yep. And Sundays, I'm sure they made quite a bit of noise, depending on if they were holiness or not.
Joyful song type of way.
And some churches can be more joyful than others, because one of the churches, we actually have two churches that meet here regularly right now. One is meeting in what we call the community room, and the other is meeting in a classroom. And eventually they may go into the sanctuary, because there have been churches that have met in the sanctuary in the past, but I think that they want to get to a certain size before they have that conversation. But yeah, they can get quite joyful, because I want to say one of them is more Pentecostal than the other, but they definitely can get very joyful and get a lot of sounds going on, whether that's the tambourines or the vocals or a number of other things. You mentioned earlier, and you don't hide it and everything, and I appreciate people that are candid about what is going on in their life. And I knew a artist friend of mine, and I think Amy may still be around, but she was a Wiccan and definitely was in that space, and definitely was a amazing artist. And like I said, we lived in the same area there in Winston-Salem, which is another city here in North Carolina, and definitely they tried to capture a lot of people's essence with their artwork, and some people may have felt that maybe they captured too much.
I'm not Wiccan.
Okay.
Wicca is a religion. I just had a Wiccan on my own podcast. Wicca is a form of witchcraft. It's very earth-based. I'm a celestial and angelic magic practitioner, so I actually work solely with archangels.
Cool.
It's a magic that is like what was outlined in the Book of Enoch, which is one of the books of the Bible that had been removed. It is considered a form of chaos magic, which sounds really scary, but all chaos magic is deconstructed magic that allows you to borrow from other traditions in order to practice your own craft. And mine happens to be it's the magic of the divine, which I know some people will be like, blaspheme, heretic, but it's the magic of the divine, and it does work. It can only be used for healing purposes and for guidance and for protective purposes. It can't be used for baneful purposes, baneful meaning to do harm.
Right.
The only harmful form of magic within celestial and angelic magic is something called the God's Justice Curse, which is a karmic curse that can only be cast when you are trying to protect others from the actions of someone known to be. It brings them a karmic lesson within this lifetime and stops them from hurting people. So I'm a celestial and angelic practitioner or a celestial and angelic witch.
If I misheard you, my apologies and everything.
No worries. People hear witch, they think Wiccan because that's the only form of witchcraft that they know of. But there's green witches, there are kitchen witches, there are eclectic witches, there are pagans, there are neo-pagans, there are lunar witches. Believe it or not, there is many denominations in magic as there are within Christianity and different focuses. And my particular one is almost always, it doesn't work with covens, it's always soul practitioners. And it does actually, when I call things, I am calling upon the Father, Son, the Holy Ghost, and I'm a what's considered a divine conduit, which means I bring people spiritual messages from the Archangel Gabriel, who is on the judgment card in tarot, and it's about epiphanies and truth and helping people shine a light into the darkness of their souls so that they can find their truth and walk forward on their path. And that's what celestial angelic magic is. It connects you to the divine.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But I know that some of our folks that have founded this network have seen where they are misused, words that are misused and all in that space. And I would argue, just like I just accidentally did this time, that witch and even magic are misused terms and all in that space. So when you are talking to folks that don't necessarily have the understanding of what you're talking about, how do you get them to understand that it is more beneficial than it is the kind of stereotype and the kind of mystical fears that people have around both witch stuff as well as around magic in general? Because a lot of people still think of magic as either a childhood.
They're frightened by the idea. It's very simply, I told them exactly what I told you. What I invoke are the archangels Raphael, Uriel, Michael, and Gabriel, and also the archangel Metatron. And so I'm literally working with archangels, and no, nothing can masquerade as an archangel. And so when people are afraid of what I do, I tell them, I'm literally working with angels. This is celestial and angelic magic. It is a divine magic that is only to be used to help people heal, to get them in touch with their divine selves, and to help them find their life's purpose, their soul's mission while they are here. And can you also do money magic for it? Sure, but it has to be for a real need. It's not for greed and for anything about, accumulation of wealth for purposes of any of the 7 deadly sins. I can't serve any of those. The only vice-related stuff I can ever do does have to do with the need to provide for physical comfort. And so I do and can do some money and prosperity magic. But for the most part, what I do is I help people align their chakras, release old pain, chakra centers being 7 energy points along your spinal column, that when you have them in flow, you're in touch with your own intuition. You had said that you think that people do have their own intuition. They do. One of the things one way that I'm going to teach your listeners how to differentiate between your intuition and your anxiety really quickly, because that's where people get caught up. Your intuition is actionable information. It will end with a period. It tells you something. Don't go down there. Do this today. If it ends with a question mark, that is your anxiety, and it is a root chakra issue. And if you're suffering from anxiety or depression, the first thing you want to do is start working on your root chakra. If you're not comfortable working through the chakra system, then that is the Archangel Michael that you would call upon, because the Archangel Michael is the guardian of earth and all things earthly. Your root chakra is closest to the earth. But when I'm trying to explain to people what kind of magic I do, they'll ask me things like, do you do love spells? No, I don't do love spells. And no, I don't do revenge spells. And no, I don't do, you can get all that magic. I could do it. I just couldn't do it with the powers that I work with. I would have to step outside of my normal practice in order to do that type of magic. And then Honestly, I'm a little like I'm a chatty Cathy. So when people ask me a question, my gosh, do I ever thoroughly answer it? So it doesn't last long, that confusion.
No, no problem. And then along those same lines, I know that some people have anxiety around something that you are also involved with because of certain images that come with it and everything. So I do know that there are a number of people that are hesitant about tarot because they have a misconception about what tarot is and want to see it as a non-religious tool or a non-spiritual tool, which I don't necessarily believe. And there are also people that are frustrated by tarot because there are certain cards within tarot that are very frightful, and people are afraid that that card may come up on one of their tarot readings. So I personally think that a lot of people stay away from tarot because of their own anxieties and fear of running across those cards as the tarots are coming out. And it is my understanding that even if that cards or those cards are revealed, it doesn't mean that that is the be all end all. There are things that you can do
No, they all
within those
interrelate.
things.
They all interrelate. So
Right,
every tarot card has a space meaning, but when you put down a tarot card spread, it basically becomes part of a sentence or part
right,
of a structure that tells you about a point in time or about an influence. Like you're probably thinking of things like the death card. The death card is
right,
rarely ever literal death. It
right,
is new beginnings. It's actually one of the cards that can come out for birthdays. And when people, and I have had, like, I've been at parties reading, and I had one woman who was shaking and crying because they were like, go get a reading. And she's like, she didn't tell me when I'm done. I'm like, I don't do that. Like, I don't do that.
right.
But also, what I do is try and help people heal. And that is my favorite use of tarot. Tarot, like anything else, like any other tool, it's going to be kind of commanded by the energy of the person wielding it. And it can be a tool for good, or it can be a tool for upsetting people and manipulating them. And you have to be careful in this land and make sure that you really understand whether or not you can trust a reader. And like, if a reader's trying to like sell you a spell immediately out, oh, look, you have a curse, pay me $6,000, I'll take it off, get out. That person does not mean you well. Find
Right.
somebody who does, because there's a lot of really, really good and ethical tarot readers who are doing it to try and help people overcome their confusion and heal their pain and connect to the actual divine source. And I believe that all paths to the divine are valid, meaning that if somebody approaches the divine through the structure, the man made structure that is religion, because people treat faith and religion as being interchangeable concepts, and they are not. Faith is your connection to the divine. Religion is the structure that was made by men throughout the ages, usually to help control the population, that is an organized practice around that faith, but it is not faith itself. In fact, religions can be greatly misused to start wars and historically have been. But faith, real faith, is what people are searching for when they're trying to make a connection to the divine. And so
No,
you
and
asked me
along
how I explained it to people, and that's part of the way I explain it to people.
no, and along those same lines, I'm glad you brought that up because I brought it up on a couple of the past shows that I've had and everything. Um, Many years ago, it might have been almost a decade ago, my dad, who lives here in Durham and is an artist in his own right and everything, invited me and my brother to come and watch a documentary. It was actually a documentary about faith and religion. And if I want to say it was a famous anchor, it might have been Peter Jennings or Ted Koppel that was doing the documentary and all in that space. But the gist of the documentary was what you kind of alluded to, which is that most religions have the basic core beliefs that are very similar, which is, respect your parents, love Mother Nature, do no harm to others, and a bunch of other very basic core principles. But it is the extremes of those principles and the personalities is where we get caught up in the differentiations and all in that space. Like I know that I get frustrated when I hear certain religious people, including some of our Christian brothers and sisters, and it's not just the Christians, it's others, faith as well, that believe that it is their way or the highway. And I've had the pleasure of interviewing now, I think, two people that have gone on the other side and the way that they describe the other side. And like I said, I'm not rushing to get to the other side to see if they are right or wrong, but the way that they described it is that they saw another side or heaven view that was filled of people of multiple faith, and they were almost describing it like different apartments or different parts of heaven, but they were all there together living in a living space and whatever that spirit realm was, because they might not have been in physical form and all along those lines. But I was just wondering your take about that, because I do think that sometimes we get too caught up in one, the personality of the church, and two, this my way or the highway kind of attitude that many churches and many religions kind of put out there. And I don't know that answer because I haven't had that conversation with God in that sense. But in my own personal beliefs, I feel that that is short sighted. But I don't know what your thoughts are about that.
Well, here's the thing. I'm very clearly a person of faith. If I work with archangels and when I'm blessing things, I bless them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. But I know that that's not the only path to the divine and to the exact same power. Remember, religions break down a divine truth, and they help us understand something that, one of the tenets of most religions is that we cannot know the mind of God.
Exactly.
And so religions are trying to help us understand a hugely complicated truth that is we're not capable of fully understanding in this form because we're not meant to. But if you want to get closer to the idea of the divine, look to the central figures of each religion and what they taught and leave it there. So whether it's Allah or Buddha or Christ, look at what their lessons were, not what the Apostle Paul wrote about them, because most of those things are about subjugating the population in general and women in particular. And if we want to make it an argument of who's right or who's wrong, we've lost the point of what a connection to the divine is supposed to be. When people talk about being saved by Jesus Christ, it is not that they become members of a Christian religion. It is that Jesus Christ's teachings, if you follow them, if you become the person he told you to be, you will in fact be saved because you will be connected to your higher self. It has nothing to do with the religion. And when they talk about going forth and spreading the word, please remember that this is a book that was printed at a time when it was very rare to own books. You are meant to go forth and live the word, not to beat each other over the head with it. And every single major religion tells us to love one another, so stop making it about being right or wrong. And the moment that you start judging somebody as being unworthy because they're outside of your belief system, you're outside of your faith and the way that you have been guided by the central figure of your religion. And so I'm pretty passionate about this because here's the thing. I got lucky. I grew up in a really true church that made it on Sundays. We would go and visit other religions and other churches to see how they practiced. And I was literally taught, no, that we're all right. We're all trying to get to the same source. It has only been within my lifetime that this divisiveness, this need to identify ourselves by an external force and an external power structure that has made us arm wrestle so much over it. And if you look back throughout the course of history, particularly in the history of England, whether it's Protestant beliefs or Catholicism have been used to wrangle power back and forth. Please differentiate between religion and faith and go by the faith-based teachings of your central figure, and you will be embodying what they ask you to. If you begin judging one another, you are immediately outside the central teachings of that particular figure, whether it is Allah, whether it is Buddha, whether it is you genuinely are beyond it when we begin saying you are not worthy, but I am because I have this book.
No, I definitely agree with you on that and everything. Because one of the things I was thinking about as you were saying that is
in
that
your heart. It's in your heart. It's not in a book. It's in your heart. The divine is in your heart and in your soul. And the way that we have understood it has been through these books, but these books have been used as control factors for people for a long time. And I am really passionate about it because I meet people who are absolutely wonderful human beings, but they have been taught to exclude others because if you don't do this the way that I do it, then you're not saved. And that is not the truth of the matter. Everyone can be, because there's going to be somebody in a far-flung corner of the land who will never have been exposed to any religion whatsoever, but they can still have a connection to something that is beyond them. And that is the first tenet of faith, is knowing that there is more to this life than we can see.
No, I definitely agree with you on that and everything. There's no doubt about that. And as you were saying that, I was thinking about how some of the things that we make judgments about weren't even around at the time of the Bible. If they were around, they weren't being judged as much and everything. That is why I think that certain churches do themselves a disservice by making judgments about things that they may not even understand. Because I'm not going to judge a person's orientation or their lifestyle choices or things of that nature. But I do think that some people make it a habit of doing that when some of those things weren't even around during the time of the Bible, and they are making judgments based on some things that they are perceiving and everything along those lines. You mentioned marriage, and I did. A lot of people forget that within some of the religious books, it was more about the contract than the love and all in that space, and that is something that isn't explored enough because I do know that it was in a lot of ways a contractual decision and not a romantic decision.
Oh, it's only been within recent history that we approach love from a romantic standpoint. Historically, it really was about alliances and making yourself safe in an unsafe world. And when it comes to any religious book, please remember every single one of the religions is dealing with a translation of a translation of a translation of a translation.
Exactly.
Honest to goodness, live your life as you would wish to be treated by others, and you're not going to go too far wrong. And are there people who are going to say, well, I'm damned to hot places because of what I just said? Of course they are going to say that. Does it make it true? No, it's just what they believe. And here's the thing, I've known too many people from too many different belief systems to think that any one group has the right answer, except that we are our best when we connect with our higher self, which chooses to be kind, which chooses to be loving, which chooses to be giving, and which chooses to take our love and try to heal one another and connect one another. Religion is never meant to divide one another, and it is being used for that. And that is because power structures, and they're very powerful structures, power corrupts. They're more interested in amassing followers and dollars and controlling people, because that is genuinely what power structures do. It's not, there's some wonderful people involved in all of the faiths and all of the religions. Please don't think I'm making a blanket statement like religion bad. No, but here's the thing, is what you do with it. And if you want to do what you are meant to be doing with it, look to the teachings of the central figures. And we've gone far field of what many of them are meant to be, because it's meant to unite us and never to divide us.
No, I definitely agree with you on that and everything. The actress that I was trying to remember was actually Anne Hathaway and Catherine Hathaway. So I was going like, I wondered earlier when we came on if you were related to either one of them, since I think both of them are.
I'm not, but I get the question about Anne Hathaway quite a bit because I look vaguely like her. We have the same kind of coloring. Hathaway is actually my married name. And I just didn't change it back because, frankly, oh my God, the paperwork. And so I kept it because it gives me a ton of A's in my names. It's easy for people to remember. And I have no connection to my maiden name from, a bazillion years ago from my standpoint. And it really doesn't, I don't think that we're defined by labels in the way that we think we are. And I like the flow of it, so I just kept it. And it's semi-common. But yeah, people ask me all the time, are you related to Anne Hathaway? No, not related to Anne Hathaway. I'm actually not really related to Hathaways, but that's my current last name and probably going to be mine for the rest of my life.
Yeah, it sounds like a positive attitude to have about the name and all along those lines. You had mentioned earlier, and I know that there are folks even to this day. So how do you turn down when people are asking you that? Because I do know that as you get older, and even some of the young folks probably come to you and are constantly asking, particularly as many folks are struggling in romance, struggling in love and life. And definitely we know the divorce rate has been high. You just mentioned that you are part of that as well, but I'm sure that as a healer, you oftentimes get people that are wanting you to find them that significant other or to conjure up that love spell and everything. So how do you turn them down, and do you think that love spells are even realistic, and can they work, or that's just a flight of fancy?
Love spells can work, but I want you to really think this one through. Why would you try and persuade somebody to love you if they don't naturally? Because anything that begins in a battle of wills will contain a battle of wills in it. And it does have a karmic implication with it, meaning that if you take somebody against their will, like, be careful, stuff's going to get taken from you. And I'm not trying to be frightening. It's just that we get fixated on the idea that another person, an exterior source, contains the keys for our own happiness. And that's never true. When we are in love, we are actually reacting to somebody with the love that we possess for all things. They are waking up something inside of you, not creating it. They are waking it up. That is the love that you possess to give to others. And I do use tarot to help people understand their romantic life and when they will meet somebody. When somebody asks me for a love spell, I tell them I don't do emotionally influential magic, and here is why. Whenever you do something, you are opening a door. And if you're a person contracting to have love magic done, which is to influence another person's emotions, you're opening the door into your life to have somebody do that to you as well. Forces that you do not reach for have a very hard time reaching for you. And it is much better to let somebody who is not prepared to love you body and soul go rather than to try and force the issue, because it won't hold forever. And there's always going to be a part of you that will be watching for the moment that it wears off. And then the other part is if you're looking for your person, which is what the big, the way it's turned now is, I want my person, when am I going to meet my person? Here's how you find your person, guys. Be your own person first. Right. Because honest to goodness, when we think of our lives, we talked about this just a couple of minutes ago, how it is a modern construct that we think the point of our lives is falling in love. It is modern times that have taught us that. And honest to goodness, if your life is a pie and it contains 8 slices, romances and love and marriage is supposed to take up 2 slices. The bulk of your life, the bulk of your experience is lived as you find your purpose, and you'll find your purpose. It really is about, people will join us on a journey, and sometimes they'll stay forever, but sometimes we need to part ways. And if we become more comfortable with the idea of not being defined by whether or not an exterior source loves us, which is a romantic partner, or how we are viewed by society when we have a romantic partner, if you can begin to understand that part of the reason that, because women, we come from a disparate place, by the way, guys, men and women are not taught the same things about love. Men do not value it at the same level. I'm not trying to be completely gendered, but we're still working through that as a society. And women really get their identity caught up in it, because in a patriarchal society, we were taught that the only way to truly have power was to have a male partner. And we don't really need one, and you don't want to keep the ones who are there against their will anyway. So start by connecting yourself to your divine force so that you can heal your own heart, so that you won't be looking to the love of another person to add balm to the wounds of your soul, which is what people are doing. So when you do find love, it will be so much better, because it won't be need-based. It will be real love, and real love does exist. Everything I just said can make me sound like I'm the anti-Hallmark doll. I'm not. Real love is there. Soulmates exist. Romance is real. But
it definitely sounds like you're being very realistic, and soulmates do exist. I do oftentimes hear people talking. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this as well, about karma, and how karma can be something that can bite you in the back and everything. Because I do know some folks, including myself, that have been in relationships, and you feel that sometimes if they didn't end as well as you would like, or there were things that were gone into with a misunderstanding or a wrong nature, that karmic payback can be a real I'll use that B word to some degree, and all in that space. But I was just wondering your take on karma and the nature of karmic payback.
Okay, so what you need to understand is karma is not rewards nor punishment. Karma is about the lessons that you need to learn to become the very best version of yourself that you can be. So sometimes you will have they're called karmic partners, to try and help teach you a lesson about what you're trying to heal within yourself. And in my case, I was married to someone, and it was a very toxic relationship for the last 10 years or so of it. I was afraid to leave because I'd had my identity way too wrapped up in it. And I did leave because I, just couldn't be treated badly any longer. So what was the lesson in that? To not accept love that was not worthy of me, to not stay with somebody out of a need-based place, but rather because we would empower each other. The idea of karma within relationships is nothing's ever punishing you, but something's always trying to teach you. So if you need to learn a lesson about perhaps generosity, and you have a lot of loss brought to you, it is because that you need to experience deprivation to have empathy with it. Karma teaches us a lot of empathy, but nothing's up there like sending down lightning bolts to be like, you must be punished. Even the karmic justice curse that I was talking about, all it does is bring that person's lessons over and over again about how that particular individual valued money over people over and over again. And so whatever I don't get to dictate that lesson. I just, designed the curse and was like, keep him from hurting anybody and probably bring him all those lessons and I'm out. And that's what karma is. Karma is something trying to teach you a lesson to illustrate either the wrongness of the path that you are on, or that you need to take a greater perspective in order to achieve something called ego death. Because a lot of our karma is here to help us challenge our ego. And there's nothing wrong with your personality and your ego, but to achieve your higher self, to be in alignment with your higher self, which is the best spiritual being you can be while you are here, you have to be able to see from a greater perspective as well. Most of the bad relationships people are in, by the time they're on the other side of it, they're like, I don't even know I was there. I don't know what I saw in the person in the first place. Because you were
there's a couple things you just said in that lane that had me thinking. One is that oftentimes if you're in a bad relationship, sometimes your friends afterwards will tell you that they knew it was not going to be good in the first place. And sometimes you go and counter them at that point and ask them why they didn't tell you that during the relationship. And the general refrain is that I didn't tell you because you wanted to believe me because you were too much enthralled and I didn't think that you would respond well to what I was trying to tell you. So I do hear that, but as one that has been in those situations, I wish that they would give me the opportunity to make that judgment for myself by revealing what they felt were the bad qualities or the detrimental qualities that they might have seen from their past relationships and all along those lines. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about that. But before you get to that, the other thing that I was curious about is there is some people that believe definitely, and I don't know what your own beliefs are, in reincarnation. There are some people that say that you learn these lessons oftentimes multiple times, and sometimes we learn them so many times that we keep repeating the same mistake over and everything. I know that there's that thing about insanity, and the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again. So I wonder if that is also the definition of spiritual insanity, if you are doing the same thing over and over again, life after life, if you believe in reincarnation and all in that space. I'm not saying everybody.
I do believe in reincarnation, except that it's a little bit interesting because it means that you have energy within you that belonged to that prior lifetime. And the way we think of time as being linear is not like, this is not a woo-woo thing. This is an MIT science thing. We don't understand the structure of time. So please understand that part. When we talk about past lives, you likely have had past lives, and we do return to this life form over and over again as we try to ascend that spiritual evolution staircase. The honest to goodness, the thing is that people become very interested in their past lives, and I do a form of past life regression reading, and it always focuses on the things you're still trying to heal. Right. We are trying to make peace with being a divine soul in these very complicated bipedal bodies that, if you notice humanity, we have this very small problem where we get to a certain level of advanced technology and we tend to destroy ourselves. Mm-hmm. It happens over and over and over again. If you study any form of ancient history, it's like, what happened at the end of the Bronze Age? Well, there was either a plague or they killed each other. We're not really sure. Like, honest to goodness, we have had a lot of technological advancement. If you look at the architecture that still stands from things like the Roman times, we have not invented advancement. We simply are courting our next turning of, like, are we going to continue to advance and evolve, or are we going to self-destruct, as is what usually happens to the human condition? And here's the thing. It is actually something that you can lean into and learn whether or not you believe in the idea of past lives. Is that you will feel happier, you will feel more peaceful, you will feel more connected if you learn to balance between your earthly self and your divine self. And your divine self is part of what brings you those karmic lessons. One that I just went through is, like having to learn to rely on myself and learning to be independent, learning to have my own voice, to be somebody who does contradict or does challenge or does say, like, hey, let's not conform. These structures aren't working for us any longer. So you will have situations, that isolated childhood that I was talking about is the part that formed that in me. I'm never a joiner. I'm always the person on the outside going, what are you doing in there? And when you are the person on the outside looking at that, it's much easier to see the whole picture. And everybody can do that in their own lives with their own soul, is to start wondering in this, maybe you're having arguments with a relative, step outside of yourself for a moment. Don't make it about your feelings. What's going on in their life? What went into their nurturing experience? What made them? What could be explaining what they're doing that isn't about you? And that is part of the whole concept of ego death in a spiritual journey. And when you achieve ego death and you achieve spiritual alignment, then you are supposed to transcend this physical form, having learned the lessons that you need to. And that is when we talk about heaven or any of the other religious beliefs, it is about going towards the light source when you join with your collective again. And part of past lives may be, in fact, that you are able to access collective information about those lifetimes because it pertains to your path and to the lessons that you are trying to learn as the unique divine soul that you are. Because we are all unique, and we can do things in predictable patterns, but we all come here with our own soul purpose. And if we try to make it about falling in love with another person, it usually doesn't work out. But if you try to make it about understanding yourself, you're very likely to have love in your life because you won't accept any poor substitutes because you're looking for another part of yourself. Find your whole self, and then you will find your real love.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I think that's even what the folks that in the more Christian kind of aspect talk about when they're talking about the equally yoked kind of aspect of everything. Because I do hear that a lot of Christians use that term, and I think that that is partially what they mean, is that you have to be a whole self in your journey and everything before you can get that partner that is equal to you, is kind of what you are alluding to. How important do you think it is to have a connection? I alluded to it here. There have definitely been several that have moved on, not just in my own family, but also in my friend circle as well. So I personally think that the ancestors are regularly talking to us and regularly communicating with us, whether that is through dreams or whether that is through even motion, because sometimes they might even be uh, here on this planet in one form or fashion or another. Because I know that even in this building, nobody that has worked here, and this is a old building that is over 100 and so years old. I think it was built in like 1865, and I don't know anybody that has not heard dancers or dance steps or footsteps or a number of other things at times that the building is plainly empty and all in that space. So I do think that the ancestors are regularly communicating, whether it is benign communication like that or whether it is more direct communications through the dreams. But I just wanted your take on the importance of the ancestors and having a connection to the ancestors.
Please understand that when we talk about karma, let's go back and revisit indigenous people for a little bit,
Mhm.
because like particularly white people, we've got a terrible habit of taking indigenous people's lands
Mhm.
and doing terrible things to them, like attempting genocide, because that's a darn thing that we did. We shouldn't have done it. We should probably make up for it. But one of the things that carries forward is the magic that was cast by the indigenous people, not to curse us, but to help us learn to be better.
Right.
So when you're talking about your ancestors, here's a weird way to think of it that might help people understand how you're connected to your ancestors. Think of your favorite dog breed. Is it a Scottish Terrier? Just say it's a Scottish Terrier for the moment. Every Scottish Terrier has an urge to go into holes after, because it has genetic memory. It has genetic memory of going after badgers, of being taught to hunt ground vermin. And think about golden retrievers, and they know to leap into water. We carry within us a genetic memory. We are living out an energy signature over the course of time. What came before you informs where you go unless you break that pattern. So we have a lot of people who break generational trauma, which can also be called generational curses, by learning more and doing better. And when I look at my own ancestors, like I'm talking about my alcoholic grandmother, here's the thing. They're really complicated people, but they lived in a time where they could not understand their own emotional construction, the things that had happened to them and how it shaped them. But everything I like about myself comes from those people who were great educators. I come from a long line of teachers on my dad's side. On my mom's side, she's from Scottish coal miners. You practically have to kill us dead to get us to die because we're hardier than you can possibly believe. And those are things that help me to this day, being very physically robust and being very intellectually curious and always wanting to learn more and always wanting to impart more knowledge. Who you are is not just your DNA. You have gifts and you have predispositions that can be for good or for ill. And as you grow forward into more and more knowledge, you have more tools to address the things that held those people back. But if, for instance, you're very, very gifted at fixing things, chances are good you've got a mechanic somewhere in your ancestry. Always try to honor your ancestors. You literally could not exist without them. And even though they are flawed people, they also did good things, because people are more than the worst thing they ever did. And so in my very complicated family, which had a lot of issues I won't even go into, and it's tiny. I don't have any family now, and I really was raised as an only child. Even though I have a half brother, he grew up with my mom and I did not. It's a very long story. I'll spare you. Everything that I like about myself that makes my life possible, even the gifts that I have, I can spot in particular in that grandmother I referred to, who simply was heartbroken when her husband, she had a very codependent relationship, when her husband suddenly died. And she set about drinking herself to death for the rest of her life. And that is exactly what she did. But she was funny. She was bright. She was a registered dietitian and worked for a hospital at a time when women were not likely to be very directed in their career. She came from a family which was very dysfunctional, but there were 5 girls and 1 boy. And one of the girls was developmentally delayed, but all the other girls went to college at a time that it was not common in that part of Appalachia to make sure that you were sending your daughters to college. And so I come from a long line of people who also believed in equality and in strong women and in the power of your own mind to overcome your circumstances. So I can look at them and be like, oh my gosh, what a dysfunctional wreck y'all were. Or I can say, thank you for the gifts that you gave me. And I can recognize the ways that they were dysfunctional, but they were a product of their time. And the gifts that they gave me have made me be able to be resilient and scrape myself up off the floor over and over again whenever I've needed to keep going. So the very things about me that make everything I like about myself possible come from those very same complicated and sometimes very dysfunctional people. Always remember that when somebody passes from this earth, that ego that we were talking about before, that falls away, and they become the very best version of themselves that they can be, because they have left behind their earthly concerns. So my father, who is an incredibly abusive person towards me in a lot of different ways that can be upsetting for people to hear, I have been told that he is one of the people who tries to help me a great deal. And for a very long time, I was incredibly uncomfortable with that. I was like, get away from me. And finally, I evolved to the point where I understood that he is the first person who ever told me that the most important part of me was my intellect, not how I looked. He was the very first person who told me that never let anybody else make up your mind for you. You are perfectly capable of doing that for yourself. He was the first person who told me that I was smart and I could figure things out for myself. And he stuck with that. He died when I was 15, and it was all very dramatic. And I had to go live with that mom that I referred to before. But there are many things about myself that make my life a remarkable journey, because that man was my father. And I didn't think even 15 years ago I would have said something like that I'm glad that he was my dad. But, today I can.
Well, along those same lines and everything, I was wondering, do you sometimes get, because you mentioned it a couple of times, that Appalachian background and everything, and there is a lot of stereotypes that I think are unfair stereotypes around Appalachia. Definitely some of these stereotypes are based in truth, whether that is Loretta Lynn's coal miner daughter kind of mentality, or the running of moonshine, which definitely a lot of folks did in the Appalachian space. But a lot of people, when they think about Appalachia and think about the Southern culture, they automatically go to the negative stereotypes. Because how many times have you, even there in California, run into people, then you mentioned that you are from the Appalachians, they
My
probably
grandmother and my father were. I'm not. It's just that they had Appalachian accents that I
that's
think
what I'm saying,
about.
but the Appalachian roots and everything, but the Appalachian roots, and if you mention those Appalachian roots to your friends out in the West Coast, there might be folks that automatically go to the darlings from the Andy Griffin series, or go automatically to Deliverance and want to know if you ran across those kind of individuals in your own roots and everything. So I'm just wondering, how do
Um,
you deal with those
I
stereotypes if you ever run across those?
I have, and here, but first of all, my great grandfather like owned the train station in this tiny little place called Big Stone Gap, Virginia, and so
Mhm.
it's tiny, it's genuinely tiny, and that's in Appalachia. And whenever people bring up the like, oh, or did you marry your cousins? It's like, first of all, my grandfather taught at a prep school there, so they were the educators, and but they were very there are so many things. Again, we are more than the worst thing. There is a
Right.
connection, there is an ability to get by with less, there is a celebration of whatever bounty is available, there is a love of natural beauty and to respect in the Appalachian Mountains for magic. I practice celestial and angelic magic that incorporates folk magic into it, and so there's folk magic that comes from that area as well. They were deeply connected with nature and with one another. And of course, if you want to stereotype any area, you can. And there's desperate poverty in Appalachia. And it has been a generational poverty. And people who think less of people who have come from area, because I lived in Missouri for a 4 year period as well, and I saw poverty there I didn't even know existed in the United States. But they have a stronger sense of community. They have a stronger sense of their own place within the world. Maybe they've been farmers forever and they believe in that being noble work because it has been noble throughout the generations. People can make these, you're first of all, I don't think anybody would ever like think that I'm the banjo player. I open my mouth and 800 words come out, and most people haven't heard about four of them. So it genuinely has not been something I've encountered. But when I talk about where my grandfather and my grandmother and my father were from, they can wonder that, like, were your people Hicks? And it's like, if they were Hicks or if they weren't, they were kind, they were well educated. One of the reasons that, like, when we're talking about my ancestors in that train station, my great grandfather shut down his train station rather than allow convict labor to be unloaded there because he felt it was wrong to force prisoners to work. And
And that's
so
it.
that informed me more than, and do I know how to, like, when I don't eat meat any longer, I haven't in a long time, but I used to make the world's best grilled chicken, and that came from my southern lineage as well.
So I hear what you're saying, because actually a dear friend of mine who actually moved here partially to be with her now husband and to raise the two kids that they have is Risa Palmer. And Risa Palmer actually did a lot of songs about the country music and making sure that people understand that country music has some roots even in the African American culture, because she actually does a album that is part of what she is involved with, and has a series called Color Me Country, which is definitely dealing with a lot of the fact that folks oftentimes don't think of the African American aspect of country music, even though the banjo literally came out, and you just mentioned the banjo, out of one of the African nations and all in that space. So definitely that is sometimes how we have to break the stereotypes that exist and all in that space and all in that kind of way. When it comes to Appalachian folk magic and Appalachian folk lore and everything, is there any sort of folklore that you, or folk magic that you even put into your own magic that you do and everything? Because I do know that there are several rituals and all, and folk magic can be quite interesting. A story that my family tells, and you'll get a kick out of this, is that my grandfather, when he was living, had to do some fast talking because there was somebody that was stealing items, and he was a well-to-do businessman, so he definitely wasn't the one that was doing it. But they put like some sort of spell out there, and whoever came by and saw the image of the water was supposed to be the person that had committed the crime. And as it turned out, he was the person that walked by and had to do some serious explaining, because he was like, that was nowhere near there. There's no way that I did it. And he alluded and found out that he wasn't the person, but there was some of that folklore that was going on, and some of that kind of I won't say spells, but kind of things that were put out there that were supposed to be the be all end all in terms of finding the answer. But in that case, they would have found the wrong culprit and all in that space and everything. But he did have to do, as it was told to me secondhand, some serious fast talking.
Here's the thing. One of the things about Appalachian, like I think the person that like people are going to be able to illustrate the point actually comes from, I believe, the Smoky Mountains. But
Right.
Dolly Parton, who grew up just incredibly poor and is in one of the best souls that walks the earth now and loves everybody. In
Yeah.
Appalachia, people have a tendency to respect someone's humanity because nobody had much. It was never conveyed simply through wealth. And when it comes to folk magic, one of the things in folk magic, I incorporate a lot of spices. I incorporate
Mhm.
some candle magic. I do petitions that are based in folk magic as well when I'm doing candle magic. Because celestial and angelic magic is a very interesting modality because it does acts that you basically take the rituals from other because that's why it's chaos magic from other belief systems and adapt it to celestial and angelic practices for the purposes of healing and for guidance. So I use it all the time. When I just did, and it's on my Instagram. My Instagram is private. People have to be approved for it because on Instagram they have a tendency to clone the tarot card readers, and so people approach you in the DMs and be like, "I'm trying to sell you a reading," and they're pretending to be the tarot card reader. But I put the spells up, and I just did one to try and help unite a family, and it incorporated stones from a faith house and salt and earth from a faith house as well, rosemary, lavender, juniper to clear. These are all practices within folk magic. What you're talking about is like there's hot foot spells. There are all kinds of different to get rid of somebody, to bend someone's mind. You can have a come see me spell. There's one called a bend over spell as well to try and dominate somebody. Folk magic is very flexible and it is the people's magic. That's why it's folk. It's the magic of folk. And it can utilize just the things that are within your own home because it comes from practices where people have very little and is highly adaptable. When we talk about magic, it is the focus of your energy through these tools to amplify it. And certain things will aid that energy more. One of the people I was talking to on my own podcast was we were trying to figure out what was the best way to say this. And it really is that magic does work because it is an energy vibration that you are trying to send forth to shape the energy around you. But you have to know what you're doing to do it well. And in folk magic, they were always trying to accomplish healing first. People are so afraid of witchcraft and things like poppets, which we think of them as being voodoo dolls. Voodoo is a religion, by the way. So voodoo is a religion. But poppets were actually made by healers to begin with to try and perform what is called sympathetic magic. And I talked about not doing baneful magic, Baneful, baneful. Sympathetic magic is what folk magic is used for best, for prosperity, for healing, for helping to increase a feeling of love or a connection to your ancestors. When people are trying to figure out what should I go towards if I'm trying to discover a more magical side, look to your ancestors first. Look to the regional area. You may be called to something like an indigenous person's practice because we have been different people at different times. It's not just in the line of the blood, it's the line of the energy. So you may have an affinity with something outside of your genetic ancestry, but look first to your genetic ancestry and what the folk magic or the folk practices were of the people of the region that you're from, and you will have a natural energetic affinity for that. And you may branch out from it after that, but try to remember, if you wouldn't want it done to you, please don't do it to somebody else, and it's very unlikely that you'll have something go very, very wrong. People reach for magic for manipulative reasons sometimes, and they don't get very good results because magic works best when it is done in the service of your highest good.
No, I definitely agree with that and everything. I'm Gary to wind down shortly and everything, but one of the things I was going to find out about you and to hear your thoughts about this and all is a lot of people also don't understand the importance of folk cures because I know that we just are now slowly getting out of the pandemic, and I've heard a lot of people that found some cures, whether that was crystals or whether that was plants, because I definitely know that there are some plants that I have found even here in the South that can have some very rich, curable, well, not curable, but medicinal purposes and all in that kind of line. So I just wondered how much of that have you been doing in your own work and in your own practices and everything? Because I don't do enough collection of it, but I do believe in the power of folk medicine and definitely some of the medicinal things that can exist in the plant life. And I think that too often we get caught up in we're talking about like that, we get caught up in the personality of religion. We also sometimes get caught up in the personality of doctors and some of the medicines that are the more synthetic type of medicines, when there might be some medicines that actually exist even within our own plant life and animal life. And I am a big believer. Some friends say that I am a empath with animals and all in that space, but I definitely have a love of not just the pets. I don't have any pets of my own at this particular moment, but I definitely enjoy seeing the cats and the dogs of friends and acquaintances when I am out and about, and I definitely even enjoy seeing the rabbits and every other animal out there. But I was just wondering your thoughts about the notion of folk plants and folk medicine in that sense, and also the notion of being connected to animal and wildlife in general.
Well, first of all, one of the things we have to accept is that more than one thing can be true at once, and usually is. So, modern medicine is a great gift, and antibiotics have saved so many lives. We live in the modern age where psychiatric medicines can make a previously torturous condition livable.
Right.
So, you can have that and recognize the validity of it. But please understand, for the great span of time before we had modern medicine scans, people still received healing. There is validity to both. There is also the idea that part of the reason that people knew to use specific herbs and for healing and spices and things was because they were guided by their own intuition, their connection to a collective knowledge. When you talk about being very connected to animals, I absolutely believe that. We remember animals are not a lesser form of life, they're a different form of life. They have
Right.
very sophisticated sensors with them. A dog's nose is one of the most sophisticated smelling things that can practically take you through time, because a dog can sniff an area and know that a different dog has been there 2 weeks prior and whether or not they were healthy. So their little noses are diagnostic tools. If you try and be in flow with all living things and understanding that even if a form of life does not look exactly like a human life, there is still validity to it. I go every single day that I can, and I was there this morning to connect to trees. I go to a botanic garden, and I found a private little area where I can sit by some oak trees and a stream, and that's where I ground, I center, I call in what I call what people would call the corners. I call in the archangels and I call in the directions, and that's where I go to protect myself from other people's energies on days that I read, because I need to be shielded from their energies so I can look into their world without getting whatever spirit attachments or whatever energies they might be struggling on me. When you talk about being very connected to animals, they don't question whether or not they can sense things. We do. The reason that you feel more connected to animals is that you are also trying to sense something outside of your own consciousness. And trees in particular have a society. They communicate with each other through their roots. Do they communicate with each other like human beings? Hey, what's up, pal? No, they're not human beings, they're trees. But they can communicate fire, they can communicate drought, they can try and heal one another. It's a very sophisticated ecosystem, and if you want to have the best and the most resonant and pleasurable experience that you can, connect with the world as a whole in order to feel like you are a part of something. When you
It's
connect with
interesting. Yeah, it's interesting you said that because I was on a friend's podcast, not here on Pod TV, but they occasionally pop in on Pod TV. But they have their own network. I think it's called the World Economic Talent Forum or something like that, and everything. But we were having a conversation because the gentleman that runs it is out of Malaysia, if I'm remembering correctly, and everything. But we were having a conversation about energy and what's going on in the energy space. And one of the things that I said as we were waiting for the host to come back on and wrap up the show was this notion that maybe we need to pay more attention to the least of these, because if you want to talk about animals that are the least of these, but they work in a collective body and they do a great job of living in that space and doing some amazing things in terms of what they are able to create in their villages and all in that space. You can't get much smaller than an ant or a bee and all in that space. And one of the arguments that I was saying is that maybe we as humans need to stop thinking that we are so much better than those little small animals and borrow some tactics from them and work more collectively because they do work in unity on a lot of things that we don't work on unity at. So that was the point that I was making, and I think it is a valid point that we might need to learn from our ant and bee companions.
Well, and we can also find who we are in relationship to power, which again, power is the most corrupting source that there is in our relationship to animals, because we have all the power over most of them. And so you find what you need to heal. If you need to heal your patience, if you need to heal your frustration, if you need to open up your love space, you find who you really are. Because character is not revealed in how we treat people that we wish to impress or that we like. Your true character is revealed in how you treat people who have less than you do, who have less power than you do, and can do nothing for you, because that's who you really are. All the other ones is, these are the face that we're putting forward, the way we wish to be seen. In those circumstances, particularly as we relate to animals, we are seen as we really are. And that is where we start growing from, and that is where we start healing from, not in the false facades that we put up for ourselves and others. And by the way, that's not a criticism. We all do it. It's just, if you want to feel happier, you want to have more love in your life, if you want to feel more magic in your life, if you want to feel more connection and more hope for this world, start by healing the things that bother you and to make you feel more peaceful as a result when you heal them. When we are peaceful, we reach for solutions. When we are in pain, we have a tendency to lash out. Find what you need to heal and try to connect in all of the ways that you can with the world as a greater living organism. We are all connected. We are all equal. And if we would start treating each other as such, instead of what do you believe, am I rejecting or accepting you based on who you voted for? If we would stop doing that, we would have a better society, we would have better lives, we would have better relationships, and we would feel better. Which, if you're not interested in any of the other things that I'm talking about, it's the way you can feel better. It's the way you can feel comfortable in your skin. It's the way you can like yourself. It's the way that you can feel real joy and let your troubles pass from you after you've cleared the hurdles of the obstacles that are sometimes in all of our paths. Find the way to heal the parts of you that are wounded. And the easiest way to do that is to try and start connecting with animals, with nature, with your own body. Whenever people are hungry or upset or angry, I tell them, drink a big glass of water, have a good snack, get some exercise to make your brain produce the correct chemicals to bring you back into balance, and then reassess from there. But most of the things we are experiencing, or it's trying to tell us something about our condition within. If you're usually, anger is protecting fear. So when you're angry, stop, take a moment, breathe in, breathe out, do it 3 times to get your heart rate to slow down, and ask yourself, am I really afraid of something? Because fear you can address and you can talk yourself out of, and you can learn to be your best friend, your best ally within your own mind. And anger is almost always destructive. Every now and then it's protective, but for the most part, it is one of the most destructive forces that we possess. Heal yourself, you heal your anger, you find your love, you find your peace.
No, definitely. I hear you on that and everything. One of the things that I was curious about, and we brought it up on some of the other shows as well, is how do you deal, even in your own practices, with those inner critics and those outer critics? As you mentioned your own history, and I know that we've all had them. I know I've dealt with it as well, but how do you get past those uh, inner voices that sometimes will tell you that you are not good enough or that you are not going to be successful? I'm sure that even in your own business aspect of the wellness space, that there are times that you are frustrated and want to do better than is actually going at this particular moment. So how do you deal with those inner and outer critics? Because sometimes those outer critics, our friends and acquaintances, can constantly be chirping in our ear, just like we can be constantly arguing with ourselves.
I have a method for that, and it's one that I teach my clients all the time. And it is that the voice that you hear in your head is not your voice. It is the voice that was part of your nurturing experience. It is the programmed response to yourself, usually by people who were trying to sometimes help you, but sometimes control you. And you need to start hearing your own voice say positive things. And affirmations can be a little bit empty. I am good. I am kind. I am working on myself. I am proud of the efforts that I've made. Use voice memo. Use voice memo when you do it. And when you take a walk at lunch or whatever time you might, play it back to yourself so you can start reprogramming the voice within. And when you have that strong and certain voice, I'm doing the best I can, I'm proud of myself for the gains that I have made, I understand that I wasn't as kind and patient as I need to be there, but I will do better this next time, and I see the ways that I have improved. When you start talking to yourself, if you wouldn't say it to your best friend, do not say it to yourself, and learn to start talking to yourself as if you are your own ally, and that you accept that we all have detractions, we all have things that we're working on. And when you do that, you no longer care what other people think about you because you are secure in yourself. So address that inner dialogue first, the wounded inner child or the inner critic that we all have, to be on your team, to be your best ally versus your biggest detractor. And remember, your biggest detractor, the doubt, it's related to, what did I say before? If you're angry, look for what you're afraid of. When you find yourself doubting, ask yourself, what am I really afraid of? And work on your root chakra, by the way, and work on grounding, which is connecting to nature. It makes sense that we have a symbiotic relationship with the earth itself. Go out and literally get on the ground and touch a tree, and it will help rebalance your inner energy so that you have the best starting point for your own healing journey. And when it comes to what other people say about you, I beg of you not to care. You have no control over it. You will never know what other people are saying about you. That whole thing where my whole life I was a little excluded, the great gift from that, the Cracker Jack surprise, the best thing about that is I have never tried to seek out inclusion because I have never been part of a herd or part of a greater structure. I have always been slightly on the outside, and I like it here because I get to look and see the ways in which it's like, well, you know, one of the things we've done in the society is we've normalized lying as a way of life. I'll see you later. Let's get together. Let's do lunch. We don't mean it. When foreigners come here, one of the most confusing things for them is that our social discourse in the name of courtesy contains a great deal of dishonesty. If you want to start being happier and feeling better about your life, live an authentic life. Be honest with yourself. There is a way to speak truth kindly. We are not keeping it real, which sounds like bludgeoning somebody over the head with mean words. You can speak the truth to yourself and to others kindly. If you are not happy, if you are suffering, go towards healing your inner world and understand that everything that you are suffering from, the likelihood that there is a reason for it in your formative experience, that once you understand it, understanding is half the battle to overcoming. Learn to understand yourself and your impulses and your responses, and you will have gotten halfway to learning to control them, which is responding and not reacting. And when you learn about responding and not reacting, you have a lot of control and a lot of power and a lot of peace and a lot of resonance and a good connection to whatever it is that you consider source or the divine.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree with you on that and everything. By the way, as you were saying, I was just thinking about your mentioning the botanical garden that you go to, and all along those lines. And there is an amazing one here in Durham that a lot of people attend, and I need to actually get by it again and everything. I've been there a few times, but it's the Sarah B. Duke Gardens, which is right there on Duke's campus and has a lot of amazing plants from around the world, because they definitely have the plants that are native to the area, but then they have also imported some. So it is a truly wonderful botanical garden. And they sometimes even do some music out there as well. So I'm definitely got to get out there and hear some of the music, plus just enjoy the garden. And there is a walking path that is also, I believe, on the Duke campus. It has like some pond like area, might even be multiple ponds, but I remember running into some turtles, and definitely they have some of the birds and other things. So I've got to get back out to walking that particular path, because I used to do that quite a bit at the early parts of the pandemic, and definitely in some earlier times before the pandemic, but I got to get back into that habit to have that space, because a lot of times that is good reflective space where you can meditate, and meditation is very important, and meditating out in nature is very important. So that's one of the things I was wanting to hear your thoughts about, because I think some people are thinking that they have to do their prayers in the physical building. And I'm not knocking the physical building. Churches
No.
are wonderful institutions, but I think a lot of times we can have some very deep conversations with God and the angels without being in the physical buildings. And you don't have to be in the physical buildings. You don't even necessarily have to have the spiritual books, because I think sometimes think you can have some very deep conversations outside of the book as well, or the books of the spiritual nature and everything. But I'm just wondering your thoughts as to the importance of having these kind of conversations just outside, and reflecting and doing some meditation in the outside environments, or maybe even in your own house, because I do have some friends that are in that same lane as you are with crystals, and they are very avid crystal users and have some very dynamic crystals in their own home and all in that space. But what is your thoughts around doing the prayer and the prayer connection either in your home or out in the nature?
Remember that nature has the ability to heal itself if given enough time. And so when we talk about a connection to the divine or connection to faith, or the conversations about that we need to have to be able to make this place better as an overall world, trees endure. They are the witnesses of so much history. That place that I go to is actually quite private, and I found it one day just by accident. And there's a giant oak tree that has to be over 100 years old. And before I leave, and by the way, try leaning against a tree when you're really stressed out, and simply ask the tree, take this from me, as you've got your spinal column pressed up against it. I swear you will start to feel more grounded and better. But I lean against the oak tree and I ask it to make me strong and to help me endure as the oaks do. And I always leave there feeling more energized, feeling more connected, and feeling like I can see essentially the beauty of this existence, because it does exist in nature. If you want to get closer to your divine space, to your own connection, go to a place that reminds you of what you truly believe is beautiful. And it's almost never man made. Now, churches quite frequently are, but go to a place where you can see the wonder of this world, which is so often contained in nature, and your troubles will seem less, and you will be able to breathe more deeply, which helps bring you into better energetic flow, which will connect you to your own intuition and into your own answers. And remember to try and get in touch with some form of nature at least once a day. If you do not live anywhere near a tree, or you're like, you know what, I live in a concrete jungle and there isn't a tree for miles, remember YouTube, which is my favorite free source for so many things. I go and I watch these winter walks in Stockholm, Sweden, where it's a first person point of view, because I don't see a lot of snow in Southern California. And so in the winter, I was watching these. It's called Walking Viking, is one of my favorite channels. And he's just walking around in the dark through the woods in Sweden, carrying his camera. And it's beautiful, and it's restful, and it's peaceful. The next best thing is a representation of that energy, because just like I can read people online, you do not need to be physically proximate to something in order to get the energy of it. We are more than our physical mass. There is a living energy that is not defined by geographic space and is not contained within geographic space. We just have to reach for it with our consciousness, and it reaches us. Nature is healing because it is self-repairing, and it grows and it flourishes and it adapts. It adapts to the circumstances around it, so it's incredibly resilient. So
No
it
doubt
is.
about that. And one of the other things I was going to get to, and then, like I said, we'll wrap up in about 5 or 10 minutes and everything. But one of the other things I was going to get to is, you kind of alluded to it earlier, but I'd love to hear your thoughts, because I sometimes think, we were talking about this in the earlier edition of the online dinner party, that we don't have enough connection to our childhood. And a lot of times we get caught up in the rat race and what is going on in the rat race, and we don't get that wonderment of childhood, and we let it not be developed as much as it should be. Because I personally think that we need to have childlike wonderment, even if we are fortunate enough to make it to 100 or and 10 and everything. And definitely you need it as a adult, even if you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, as I am, or a number of other spaces. But what is your thoughts about maintaining that inner child? Because I do think that sometimes folks are so busy worrying about their relationship status, maintaining their husband wife relationship if they are married, or boyfriend girlfriend if they're not married, worried about paying the bills, worried about all of the other rat race things that go on in our life, and we don't spend time to have fun. And sometimes you can have fun even in relationships, and just have fun in silliness, because you can even do some silly things together with your friends. And I don't know that we do enough of that, but I was just wondering your thoughts around that and ways that you maintain that childhood wonderment in your own life.
One of the things that we need to remember is that we are our best selves when we are children, because hormones come in and they, desires and the ways that we are at the whim of like our lesser natures develop. Please remember that half of the answers that we have been told will bring us joy don't. Acquisition of things, it doesn't matter as much as we think it does. We're mostly held prisoner by our stuff, quite frankly, trying to pay for it, trying to maintain it, caring what other people think of us. And what I'm always telling my clients is, if you want to be happier, remember what you really liked doing when you were 9 years old, because that is just mature enough to have a sense of individual self and your own wants and needs. But you're young enough that you're not worried about the future, and you're not at the whim of those lesser impulses. And those contain the seeds of what will make you happy again as an adult. Because as children, even when we come from difficult circumstances, we have a gift of going towards healthy escapism, whether it is losing yourself in books, or I was just telling this to somebody else earlier today. One of the things that, after recovering from, the breakup of a long-term marriage, because it was a long marriage, it was 20 years, and I was very depressed in the aftermath. One of the ways I started coming out of that, because I didn't wish to take antidepressants because I was concerned it would affect my ability to read, I remembered that when I taught myself how to cook. I was alone in that house a lot. I had a Fannie Farmer cookbook, and I would go down there and I would get recipes out and try to make it. And usually I didn't have all the ingredients, which I'm sure is where half of the witchcraft started coming in, where I was like, maybe if I substitute this, it will work out. And I was a little tiny scientist in there. That cooking and teaching myself things were one of the healthiest forms of escapism that I had. And I did love going to camp, and I did love being in the woods. So I was revisiting that. Look at your interests and who you were when you were 9 years old and what you liked, and find the adult version of that to find a healthy escapism. Because in adult life, we go towards destructive forms of escapism, quite frequently gossiping or drinking or drugs or acquisition of material goods that only fill the hole for a slight or a short period of time. And listen, I'm a Taurus. I love nice stuff. I'm not saying, rebuke all material goods and you can only be good if you're happy, if you renounce all possessions. Your possessions are fine, but find your connection to your joy, which is what you had when you were a child. If you love to read graphic novels or comic books or collect stamps, go back towards doing that again. You can do it in a more adult version, and it will reconnect you to the part of yourself that had hope. Because that is what is often missing, is that people, when you're 9 years old, you expect the whole world to change and your life to change and for everything to be possible. And when we're adults, we start to believe that isn't true. Find who you were when you were that person who effortlessly reached towards self-entertainment and healthy escapism, and you will find your connection to the part of yourself that you miss the most, which is the part of yourself that believed, that had hope, that had faith, and that had the ability to let things go when they had passed, which is another skill that we lose as adults that we need to reacquire.
No, I definitely agree with you on that and everything. As a matter of fact, one of the things I've been doing lately is sometimes you can find some amazing games even online, because sometimes if I am needing to have a break from the work here at the Hayti Center, or some of the work that I'm doing in the live stream space, or even when I'm doing test grading, which I do for a testing company and all along those lines, I will lately, over the last month or so, grab some of these different games that are out there that are phone apps. So one of them is literally one of those solve it type puzzles. So basically you're trying to figure out not so much who did it, but connecting the people and all along those lines. And then there are some like history lessons that are out there. That's one of them that I do that gives you a lot of spelling words, and you have to try to figure out the spelling words. I think it's called croptic or something like that. But then the historical clues are quite interesting because I think one of the clues I realized and found out, which I had not realized because thought I was following both DC and Marvel super comics and everything. But one of the clues was actually that um, if you go by the ownership of space and everything, technically, um, Batman is Superman's boss because he is a part owner of the Daily Planet, which I did not realize. Bruce
That's
Wayne
true.
is part owner of the Daily Planet, which I did not realize, but that was one of the clues. So he's and of course Clark Kent is as Clark Kent and not as Superman is the alter ego. So technically, Batman is the boss of Superman. So he's cutting the checks for Superman. Who knew until I was looking at that particular puzzle and everything along that line, because that was one of the clues on that game that I play on a regular basis and all along those lines. So, like I said, there's a couple of them I do. Wooduko, which is kind of like Sudoku, but it's more words instead of numbers. And that clue game is called Crostic. That's the name of it, though. It's Crostic. And then the one that I was trying to remember that is a kind of like a solve it type puzzle is one that is simply called Logic Puzzle. So it's like, um, so might have this kind of dog, and the other person might have this uh, treat that goes with the dog, and you have to figure out the connections and all of that. And it's a logic solving kind of puzzle and everything, but it's kind of like a almost similar to Clue, but minus the crime element.
And for me, and we're working out earlier. It's Star Trek.
Right.
I grew up watching Star Trek. I loved science fiction. I was a weird little kid. I loved history and science fiction, and I still do. And Star Trek Strange New Worlds is very related to the original series. And just watching that, it is so much fun. And my son and I still talk about science fiction as well. Remember the things that lit you up when you were a kid and find where they are now and find them, and you'll find yourself. And you found your ability to play.
No, and exactly. And I'm a big science fiction fan as well. So definitely have done that. And a friend of mine turned me on, and I understand that they're in their third season. And some of the things that are in this particular series that I'm getting ready to mention can be quite scary because some of the things that they talking about in the series seem to be coming to reality, including the patriarchal nature of society. But a dear friend of mine turned me on to Black Mirror. So I watched a few episodes of that, and I've been looking forward to seeing other episodes because some of them are quite scary and quite scary into the nature of whether they are might be going in that path and everything. And the same thing with Handmaid's Tale.
Black Mirror is brilliant. Skip that first episode, folks, because it's not indicative of the rest of the series. They're all standalone. And I years ago, somebody was like, "Watch Black Mirror." I watched the first one. I'm not going to go into what was in it. Like everybody who watched Black Mirror goes, "Oh yeah, lump the pig, yeah." And don't watch it. Don't watch it if you're sensitive to anything with animals. And I did go back to it after somebody basically sitting me down and going, "Please, please, 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 you would love this. Go back. That was just a one-off. It's never anything quite that terrifying again or that bad again." And I did. And it is, remember, science fiction, things like The Twilight Zone, that was the way that people approached our societal ills. It addressed things like racism and inclusion. And I got lucky in the things that raised me, since pretty much nobody did. Star Trek, and then the very liberal Episcopal Church and the Quaker Church, and the literature that I read, which was things like the Narnia Chronicles and Anne of Green Gables, and a book called Follow the Leader that contained my very favorite quote, which is, "It is better to light a single candle than to sit and curse the dark."
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the Narnia Chronicles because I went to a Jesuit university, and until recently, I'll be perfectly candid, probably in the last week or two, I did not realize until recently that the Narnia Chronicles was tied into C.S. Lewis, because that's one of the books that I read was The Screwtape Letters and all in that space, and definitely I found him to be some degrees overly conservative. I'm not saying all of his views were, but
Oh,
I
no,
had forgotten that
he's a product of his time. He's a product of his time. There is a famous story that J.R.R. Tolkien and
Mhm.
C.S. Lewis were very good friends, and Tolkien was actually an atheist until he had a conversation with C.S. Lewis, and he emerged on from it and the other side believing. And a friend of mine who's not a believer, she's like, I would love to have been a fly on the wall. What did he say? And I'm like, we all want to know, don't we? But C.S. Lewis managed to take someone from atheism to belief. And do I agree with C.S. Lewis? No, it's outdated stuff. It's very patriarchal. It's very gendered. But his heart was in the right place, and he was trying to do a good thing.
you
And
know,
one of the good things about progressive works is they are supposed to look dated when we're looking back at them because they accomplished what they set out to do.
speaking of things that are dated and everything, have you ever watched, or because that's another series that friends of mine have said they've scared them, but that is Handmaid's Tales, because some people are afraid that we are moving more toward that than we would like to, because there may be some forces out there that are trying to subject the what some people would call the fair sex. I think in a lot of ways women are even stronger, and that's because I have strong women leaders in my life, including my mama and others, including some that have passed on and all in that space. Mom is still very active and still very much around. But I was just wondering, have you watched that? And is that a fear that you have? Because some people are afraid that we may be having some forces out there that are wanting to suppress even further the women voice and the women attitude.
Um, this is part of the reason that I do the work that I do is to try and help women get in touch with their own personal power. And whereas I no longer watch the Handmaid's Tale series, the Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood is actually one of my favorite books. And like that's saying something because it's a big long list of like, how did that get into the top five? I thought it was one of the most brilliant things I had ever read. I read it when I was about 23 years old. And I think we are very obviously courting some of the problems that are from that, including poisoning the atmosphere, because that is what happened in the book, The Handmaid's Tale, and actually I believe in the series as well, is that, basically toxic waste dumps poison the land, caused fertility to drop. There are all of these problems that we are seeing enacted out. Um, but we have the power to change that if we choose. We can always course correct. We can always choose to be better and stop trying to get everything done through our political structures because they're in it to hold on to power and they're at loggerheads all the darn time. They never make any progress. They're engaged in like an eternal arm wrestling match. Start working with one another. And, women being considered, weaker or fairer, I don't agree with it. And I think that is part of the patriarchal agenda of organized religions. I think people are challenged no matter what gender they are, and that some of us rise to those challenges and some of us are given more challenges, and some people are beaten down by them and discarded by society and never even stand a chance. But I don't think it breaks down around long gendered lines. I think socioeconomic standards and the generational poverty that is frequently brought about by racist policies that carries forward poverty from generation after generation defines more than anything. I think the labels that we put onto people to define them, sometimes we can take a hold of them too much and think they apply to us. They don't if you decide to discard them. Be an individual, make up your own mind, embrace your own power, and know that if you want to see the world be a better place, the way to start doing that is change something for the better in your own life. Start healing yourself so that you can become the mighty, powerful version of yourself. And remember that you too have a voice and you too have a purpose. Go towards it and find it and work with others and stop looking to our corrupt and crumbling and diluted in some ways power structures to get the job done, because they're mostly about capitalism and making money. And we got it wrong. We got the plot wrong. Nobody's happy and nobody has enough stuff and nobody has enough money. We took a wrong turn. Let's reboot the GPS and take it in another direction, because we can if we decide to do so, but nobody's going to do it for us. So start with you. If you want to change the world, start by changing something in your own life. Change you first and then go forward into the world as a changed person. Greet other people with kindness. Treat other people with compassion, even if they're saying things that make you angry. And remember, it is better not to engage than to waste your energy arguing with somebody who is literally just coming from a place of defensiveness and pain. which is where most of this divisiveness comes from, fear. It's always comes down to about our fear of survival and whether or not we're going to make it. And if we all started helping each other, it wouldn't be such a big question.
Nope, I definitely agree with you. Well, this has been a thoroughly enjoyable conversation. I know we were going to have you on this afternoon, but we had the time difference kind of conflict there and everything. But I
Nice. I messed up. I messed up. I didn't check the time zone, and I'm in a
no
different.
problem. I'll take the blame as well. But I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. I'm going to give you the full screen, and if you want to tell folks how they can reach you, and also any message of positivity or hope that you want to give to the audience, because that is something I try to do with all my guests, because I am definitely one that believes that as many messages of positivity and hope that we can get to make this a better world, that is something that I try to do on a regular basis. So any ways that folks can get in touch with you and any message of positivity or hope that you have to share, and then I'll come back and wrap up the entire show. But definitely I would love to hear those two things, how they can reach you and any message of positivity and hope.
Okay, my name is Elaine. You can find me at therisingmoon.com to book me for a tarot reading or a life coaching session. I have a podcast called Logical Magic, Examining Esoterica, where we examine a lot of different ways to heal, particularly complex post-traumatic stress disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder. And please remember, no matter what you are suffering from, no matter what your background is, you can heal, you can get better. And part of healing is the choice to go towards it. Don't tell yourself I'll never get better. Tell yourself I will figure out how to get better, and reach towards the help that is available. There are so many free resources available for healing your energy, for understanding yourself. You don't need to live in a dark and a painful place. There is hope in this world, and you can discover it in others and in yourself. And if we all start reaching for it, remember, like energy attracts like energy. Start the wave within yourself. Please remember, no matter how much pain you're in, there is a way to feel better. There is a way to heal, and there is a way to feel as if you have a purpose in this life and a point to your life. And I do try and help people find that. But if I'm not your answer, there is one out there for you.
Well, it sounds great. I thoroughly, like I said, enjoyed the conversation and everything. I was actually thinking to myself, I wonder what the top 5 books were, because she said that she has a big book collection and all in that line. And then I was also really admiring what I think is a clock, or maybe it's some other decoration that is behind you and everything. But I was going like, that looks really massive and really cool at all in that space.
From inside the Louvre, I believe. It is actually a modern picture, but it is made to look antique. And I use it because of a book called The 13 Clocks. And I do have 13 clocks around here by James Thurber, which is an old fairy tale. And that is one of the top 5 books for me, because it is so wonderful and imaginative. And it is about time being stopped and time being started again. And it is wonderful. If you have never read it, it is magical, and my son has a copy of it, and I have a copy of it, and it's not out of print. James Thurber, The 13 Clocks. And I do that because we do not understand the structure of time. How I'm able to read has to do with us not understanding the structure of time. I sort of step outside of it with part of my consciousness. I think that there is time in this world to heal and to grow and to be the best version of ourselves. And as for the other 3 books, maybe I'll tell you some other time. But yeah, Handmaid's Tale had a profound effect on me. It made me think of things that I had not considered at that point in my life, including how women could be treated in a reductive and a dismissive fashion, and boiled down to simply our reproductive or biological functions, which ignores our humanity, ignores our soul. We are more than our biological functions, whether we are a man or a woman or any form of gender identification. We are more than our biology. You have a unique and a human soul that can be connected to your divine source to guide you towards your best experience in this life.
No, I definitely agree with you on that. And you mentioned something else that I have definitely been a believer in. Some people call it like woo-woo kind of thoughts, but I've actually seen it work. So I'm going to continue to believe in it. But there have been times that I have been in negative environments, and I've been in deja vu settings and everything. So I have been one of those people that if I feel that threat or feel that energy, will change the nature of something as well. It might be something as simple as moving a book or moving a salt shaker, but it's so far, maybe it's just my own mentality and my own belief system, but it works for me. So I do know that sometimes if I have felt that it was something that was negative or have gave me a negative feeling. It might just be something as simple as me looking around when I'm in my apartment and going like, I don't remember that salt shaker being there, so I think I'll move it to the right if it was on to the left, and it gives me a sense of comfort. So like I said, it might be, some people might say that that is very mystical and very nonsensical, but it works for me, and it doesn't have to work for them and everything. But that's just my thoughts around it. Cool. Well, I definitely hope she'll make a return trip. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation as much as I have. I'm going to bring up a gentleman from Oklahoma, and this is actually from his award that he did in 2020, but he honors the teachers, but he also honors some of the behind the scenes staff as well. So he obviously honors not just the teachers, but the janitors and the support staff. So I think the one for this year will be coming up in August, but they do this annually, and I think they've been now doing it for a few years, but it started in Oklahoma and is now going to be going to other cities and states as well. So this is one of the commercials that he's got about that particular event. And then I might have a friend's fiscal company that he has, and maybe a young lady's food company in the snack realm, and all in that space that'll get us on out of here. But like I said, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I hope that we will run across each other on another time as well. And I hope that you'll make a return trip on another day, on another episode, whether it be at 4 or a special edition like we did today at 7, or whether it's even on some of our morning shows, which I know are even higher morning for you. Speaking of irony and everything, and I'll end on this note, I have been inviting a now new friend in that was the mayor of one of the smaller towns outside of Los Angeles, Debbie Peterson, and she's been on a couple of our shows. And like I said, she's in California, and that show airs at 10 o'clock. But she was at a meeting today, but she told me she'd be on the show. She was at a meeting today, and so she was coming in from Hawaii, which means it was actually 4 o'clock when she was coming in at 10 o'clock. So she wanted to be on the show so much and enjoyed the conversations that we have about news and other things on the World Edition, that, as she reminded us, she was not joining us at 7, which is what I think she was joining us at, because she was actually joining us at 4, because I want to say she was either in Honolulu or one of the other cities there in Hawaii. So definitely she took some time out, and it was at a whole different hour than even I was expecting when she mentioned that to us earlier on today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was a delight to speak with you, and I wish you so well in everything that you're doing, Mark. And I would love to come back at any point. God knows I can talk for pretty much ever.
No problem. I enjoyed the conversation, and you would fit in with quite a few of the other talkers as well. So like I said, sometimes it's a one-on-one as we've done here today. Sometimes it is multiple guests. I think the most I've ever had has been 7 or 8, but usually it's somewhere between 3 and 4, and we just go back and forth like we've been doing, and learning about each other and finding commonalities and common grounds, even sometimes when they aren't of the same political spectrum or even the same social justice spectrum either. But it's oftentimes good just to hear different insights, whether you agree or disagree with the people, because I'm one that believes that education is us talking to each other and learning from each other. And in some cases, we may wind up being like who you just mentioned, Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. We may wind up changing each other's viewpoints, or we may just agree to disagree as well. So both things can happen in those conversations. But who knows, somebody may listen to one of your conversations and be like, hey, I need to get more into my magic that I wasn't doing at all in that space. So that's just my thoughts on that. So I hope that you'll stick around and watch these commercials, but we're getting ready to get on out of here. I'm actually getting to get out of the building because the theater group has left as well. So that's actually what I was going off to the side to find out how many they had. So get ready to get to my home front as well. But definitely, it's been fun talking to you, and hopefully I'll get a chance to talk to you again online, and who knows, maybe even in person one of these days as well. So looking forward to having some more great conversations with you.
All right.
I won't fold, I won't drop until we on top. Only going non-stop. I won't fold, I won't drop until we on top. Only going non-stop.
I want to thank everyone for coming to the 2020 TAF Awards. This was a show like no other, people. This is the Grammys for dignitaries, educators, and support staff around the state of Oklahoma and worldwide. We cannot do this without the support of the people. So we thank you. I thank you for being such a dedicated supporter to this movement for the Teachers Appreciation Foundation. I thank you.
It's non-stop. I won't fold, I won't drop until we on top. Only going non-stop.
Are you looking for money-saving strategies for your business and personal finances? Are you tired of working hard every day with little or nothing to show for it? Contact Prosperity Financial Services, LLC right now for your free financial consultation. Call now to reserve yours today. 804-349-8600. 804-349-8600.
Hi, my name is Maria Jones, baker and owner of Very Vegan, a premier mobile bakery specializing in putting a plant-based spin on some of your favorite desserts. Inspired by my own personal experience with my journey with healthier eating habits, I was determined to make comparable items with desirable textures and great taste. We're always experimenting with different flavor profiles and expanding our menu. I enjoy my creative license as well as imparting ideas and requests from my customers. It makes for new and exciting items. Some of our customer faves are the specialty cheesecakes such as the banana pudding with homemade vegan vanilla wafers, strawberry crunch, honey bun, fruity pebbles, peach cobbler, and many others. We also offer moist, rich cupcakes, delectable cookies, decadent brownies, and scrumptious pound cake. Discover how amazingly delicious vegan can be. I am available for orders, or you can purchase my items exclusively at the Black Farmers Hub.